Hi friends, welcome to Growing as Grown-Ups, where we believe each of us has the opportunity to keep growing in ways that can fundamentally improve our life effectiveness, our leadership influence, and our well-being. Through interviews, stories, and practical principles, we explore how you can accelerate your growth and unlock your potential to make the difference you want to make. And now, your hosts from the Leaders Lyceum, Dr. Sarah Musgrove and Dr. Keith Eigel.
Welcome to the Growing as Grown-Ups podcast, everyone. Keith, today is a really, really special episode. Yesterday was Martin Luther King Day, as the world hopefully knows. And today's podcast is especially fitting because you are interviewing Ambassador Andrew Young, who not only was closely connected to Martin Luther King, but also is the second person on your bucket list of guests you wanted to have the chance to interview.
Can you believe this?
So you have had a good run here lately. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about Andrew Young for those who are not as familiar with his life and his accomplishments?
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. I mean, he really is one of my living heroes. An amazingly accomplished person. We are interviewing him. I interviewed him just a couple of months before his 90th birthday, which is coming up a couple of months from now, from the airing of this podcast. It struck me this morning that he is our second pastor in a row, but he's really not known for being a pastor, right? He graduated college from Howard University when he was only 19 years old. Had a divinity degree by the time he was 24, did pastor some churches early on, but kind of really got involved in the civil rights movement and became the executive director of the SCLC. He was with good friends with Martin Luther King, really close, and with him when he was assassinated in Memphis. He became a congressman from the state of Georgia in the 70s. Then Jimmy Carter appointed him ambassador to the United Nations at the end of the 70s, and then he became one of Atlanta's really great mayors, won his second race with 80% of the vote, went on to co-chair the Olympic Committee for the 96 games in Atlanta, Presidential Medal of Freedom, streets in Atlanta, buildings at universities, so many things named after him. And with all of those accomplishments, I mean, I kind of knew all that stuff growing up, but I really began to get some exposure to him when I worked for a few years with Morehouse College, working with the board and the administration down there. And at any major institution, and really any corporate institution, a lot of times there's tension between the administrators who run the institution and the board of directors, right? I mean, that's kind of normal. But the thing that was so fascinating to me is that I think everyone in the room could count on Ambassador Young, when there was tension, rising above the fray, rising above the points of view, with great empathy and concern for both points of view, and knitting together the points of view with the values that really held the institution together. And so firsthand, meeting after meeting after meeting, I got to see this, and which is why when we started the Growing as Grown-Ups podcast, I think Ambassador Young is one of the great living examples of what it means to move way into the fifth order. And we have done so much talking about this over the last fall that I hope our audience gets it at this point. But this being able to let go of your own perspective and sort of submit it to something that's bigger than you. And Ambassador Young, as a Christian preacher, puts God in that category a lot, but you can even hear beyond that. It's just kind of the bigger, that there's something bigger than us that holds all of these different perspectives together. And I know I'm talking for a long time, I'm sorry, but he's again about to turn 90 years old when this interview plays, and he speaks at the cadence of a 90-year-old, and he's a storyteller at heart. So a lot of times my questions are just stories, right? He tells stories, but the points behind the stories are so profound. And so we did almost 2.5 hours together. And I think we're going to make that available. We'll tell you at the end of the podcast how we're going to make that available. If you're interested in listening to the whole 2.5 hours, we have an edited down version that you're going to hear for the podcast. And I'm just excited to share this conversation with our audience.
Yeah. I think it was a long but fitting introduction to him. So I think it's perfect. Just to kind of frame up for the listeners, the way that I have been thinking about this podcast is two phrases that Ambassador Young says in this conversation that to me capture his intent and his message. And he said, growing up is serious business, right? And he knew that was our podcast was Growing as Grownups. And he said, growing up is serious business. And then at the end, he talks about what you and he have been doing is building a curriculum on how to grow. And so the conversation that you have, the points of wisdom that he shares are his way of creating a curriculum for our listeners on how to grow well based on his own story. So with that, let's jump in to this highlighted version of your conversation with Ambassador Young, and we will catch up on the other side.
Well, Ambassador Andrew Young, welcome to the Growing as Grownups podcast. Personally, on behalf of our audience, I just want to thank you for spending time with us today and sharing some of your wisdom, perhaps about how you've grown over the years yourself, but also your take on how we all perhaps can keep growing to make better sense of this world that just seems increasingly polarized. So, early this year, you officially entered your 9th decade. I don't know if you've thought about it like that yet. I know you're coming up on your 90th, and I hope that's okay to say. It's congratulations from my perspective.
Well, thank you. Let me just say that I turned 90. And one of the ideas I've had is to challenge all of my friends to set aside 90 minutes anytime in their lives for reconciliation.
Wow.
And that I started thinking of some of the people that I have had conflicts with, and I never express it. But it, I don't quite get over it. And I decided that I needed to take some time before my 90th birthday, or in the process of celebrating it, to go back and reconcile with some of the people, and they're not many, that I had conflicts with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not charging them with conflicts or even confessing how much I was wrong. Is reconciliation is a coming together in spite of. And
wow,
whatever I did, and for whatever reason I did it, quite often it had no problem. It had very little to do with the person who ended up being the source of conflict, or who took the burden of my frustration. Grown-ups is not a simple question.
Yeah.
Because we expect everybody to be grown up, and we never stop growing. And when we stop growing, or when we slow down, even, or when we let the conflicts of life disturb us, and we turn in on ourselves, we're finding fault with ourselves, but we're blaming it on those around us.
Wow.
Unconsciously. So that one of the most important aspects of growing up is being able to deal with your internal conflicts in external reality. Because the more you take in, the more you're upset, and the upset, increases the acidity in your stomach. There are physical consequences to emotional disturbance. And so grown-ups is managing internal stress and external conflicts, because the tendency is to take them for granted, ignore them, and not take them seriously. But one of the requirements of being grown up is to take responsibility for your own health and your own feelings. And it's too easy to project them on others.
Wow. Yes.
See? And I think that's what our politicians are doing right now. Everybody's talking about all of the things that are wrong. And so much of it is due to the fact that the coronavirus has separated us and has kept us from meeting our friends regularly. And it's kept us from going to work regularly. And when you're at work, and you're going to be there from 9 to 5 most days, the tensions that arise in your relationship, you're right there and you deal with them before you come home.
Mhm.
But now you're home and you're not able to leave your work at work. Your work is at home. So you got home tensions, and it's not just you, it's our wives. They are going to the drugstore and planning to make a lettuce and tomato salad, and there's no lettuce. Or there's a shortage of toilet paper or napkins. And somebody says something about the supply chain, and we've never had to think about the supply chain before.
Mhm.
But all of these external conflicts, we're internalizing right now. And so it's inevitable that we have more stress to deal with ourselves, because the normal ways of relieving stress are not available to us.
And one of the things I hear you saying, maybe, but I want you to correct it if I'm wrong, is that we take that internal stress and we almost project it out or blame others or circumstances in ways that is not it's not allowing us to deal with what we really need to deal with.
Oh yeah, because when you have a shortage at the grocery store, you don't deal with it at the grocery store. You deal with it when you come home and you say something sharp to your spouse.
Yeah.
Or you're a little impatient with the kids. See? Or the phone rings and you really don't want to talk to this person, but normally you would talk to them and have a relaxing conversation. But when the phone rings and you're already stressed out, the possibility is that this is somebody else bringing their stress to you, which is usually what happens to me, because everybody thinks of me as their pastor. And I've encouraged people to bring me their troubles, see, throughout my life.
Mm.
Now I'm not as anxious to have that happen. And when we just had a mayor's race, and my candidate didn't win. Well, normally we bring people together and reconcile and go on to the next question. But in this environment, everybody's so short-tempered that when I've talked to people about, I don't even get a chance to say it's time for us to come together. um, they're still complaining about the election. And it might not be the election. It might be the fact that they've been home alone and haven't been talking to anybody. And so this has been a very complicated time of life. The regimen of your life that keeps you healthy is mental, spiritual, emotional, and it all ends up being physical. And so growing up is serious business.
Yeah.
And using myself as an example, which is what we need to do.
Yeah, to use ourselves as an example.
Yeah, we use ourselves as an example, not to get upset, but to rationalize the things that we need to do and help us to get more organized in doing them, and being able to do it without anxiety or without guilt. One of the things that I think people give preachers or religious people a bad name is they want to blame their religion for their guilt, whereas as a Christian, I see religion as a religion of grace and mercy, and God helps you through the church and through your neighbors not to carry a burden of guilt. Because when you're carrying a burden of guilt about something, inevitably you're passing it on to those around you. So a good place to start is accepting your shortcomings as inevitable and have a no-fault analysis toward yourself. Yeah, my knees hurt, say, but for 70 years, I was a runner and bicycler. And it's only been in the last 10 or 15 years that I have any pain. And I decided that I'd rather have little pain than to take on the whole challenge of knee replacements. And I live with that and accept that as a decision that I made instead of the decision that the doctors made.
Ambassador Young, you've said it in so many ways. I mean, just from the routine maintenance of being healthy, for people who feel stuck relationally, for people who feel stuck in their position, for all the division that we have, what advice do you have to folks 2-3 generations younger than you to not have this stuckness become crippling?
Well, that's why, I mean, my first answer is a church answer. And that is that it's one of the major reasons why we need to accept God's forgiveness. As a preacher, not even as a preacher, I probably became a preacher because I graduated from college very young. And here I am, 19 years old with a college degree, and guilty as hell because I know I don't know a damn thing. And it's almost like I had wasted all that educational opportunity. But instead of feeling guilty about it, I suddenly was able to accept the fact that gave me a head start. And then by the time I got to Atlanta and I realized, that Martin Luther King, Maynard Jackson, and a lot of the promising young leaders had all gone to college at 15. And it had something to do with the Second World War, with the veterans in a way. The colleges were empty, and some of them colleges started letting people in without after the 11th grade if they could pass certain tests. I was not one of those. I cheated on the beginning. I learned to read and write in a church-related kindergarten. And when I went to public schools at 6 years old, instead of putting me in first grade, they put me in third grade. And so being in third grade at 6 years old, I was always ahead and always frustrated and always young and restless and wild. But I hated that when I was in school because it made me too young to play football or basketball, and I was good in sports. So I was just too small. But it also meant that I had to take seriously all of the social battles. And whereas most young people go through high school and college, a rather relaxed regimen, I was always struggling, with everything. But mostly my teachers and my classmates, because I was younger, I was restless, but I didn't want anybody to treat me different. But then I look back and I realized that all of that was part of my education and my ability to assume leadership at a young age came from my struggling to be accepted and pushing myself into leadership roles, or whatever. I don't know. I'm not trying to analyze my childhood. Whatever it was, I've decided, well, God knew what he was doing and it worked for me. Because everything I've been pushed into,
Yeah.
I've been able to do acceptably, if not excellently. But that didn't stop me from having a C average all the way through school. But that's what it took to keep you there.
Yeah.
And I there again, I reassured myself because Martin Luther King got a C in public speaking. Morehouse.
Maybe we're
And
using the wrong
also,
grading standard.
they gave him a C in preaching at his theological seminary, which just means that their concept of preaching was different from what he grew up with.
Yeah. I know we don't have much time left, but when you think about, again, so many people feel stuck. They feel stuck in and divided. And I love your thoughts on being separated. It reminds me of Dr. King's speech at Cornell, where he talked about why men hate each other, and ultimately because they're separated and they can't know each other. But so many people feel trapped in their position, and that friends in our neighborhood, right? Friends in our church, family members, for crying out loud, that are sitting on different sides of the issue and they can't seem to rise above. And I'm curious if you have a thought on steps.
Well, I do, and actually, that's what church is for. That's what sports are for. That's what neighborhood associations are for. But see, we've been having our neighborhood associations by Zoom instead of with a backyard cookout.
Yeah.
And you don't get the same catharsis because we're restricted by a set time, and so there's nobody plugs in the time of a Zoom call, time for laughter, time for empathy. In the meeting in the backyard or having something in the neighborhood where we're face to face, we're not restricted by time, and a lot of things happen that we're not even aware of them happening. I preached a couple of Sundays weeks ago, and I went back to my old days in World War II when the Andrew sisters used to sing a song. You got to accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, latch on to the affirmative. Don't mess with Mr. In Between. And that's what I preached about, because I said we needed that positive attitude, because they were sinking ships off the coast of Georgia. The Germans were, and we were about to deal with what was the worst war. But I went back and I remembered some of the lessons we learned to get through that war. How many times would we say from Franklin Roosevelt, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself? And we've been afraid of this virus. And when your closest friends, and in my age group, some of my closest, healthiest friends, didn't make it. And fortunately, I grew up in a family where we were taught not to be afraid of death. And Martin Luther King used to say to us, you're going to die. Death is the ultimate democracy. Everybody's got to die. And you don't have anything to say about where you die, when you die, how you die. The only choice you have is, what is it you're willing to give your life for? But there's no hiding place. And my grandmother used to pray to God that she was tired. She had done all she needed to do here on this earth. She was ready to go on to glory. And Martin Luther King was in his 30s, but he would talk about death all the time, because he said, I know there's a bullet waiting for me somewhere. The way he deal with it, he said, but you all are always jumping in front of me trying to get your picture in the paper. I figure you'll jump in front of me and take it for me. And then he'd start preaching your funeral and saying all of the embarrassing things you'd never once said at your funeral. And you stop and think later, how can he be so heartless? Well, he wasn't. He was dealing with his own inevitability of death, and he was really getting us ready. So anytime we were going into something that was dangerous, he would decide who it might be, and then he'd start preaching the funeral in their face. And saying all the embarrassing things that you would never want said at your funeral. But we were able to laugh at death, and that's one of the things that's necessary right now, especially when I just saw somebody talk about how the curve for the next phase of the epidemic might go in the winter months if it sort of integrates with the flu. Or we was a biology major, so they didn't have DNA when I was in school. They didn't know what it was, but I know enough about I know that germs are active organisms that are driven to grow, to compete, and to succeed. So that there's a constant battle going on, even on your fingertips and in your hands. And your body is always trained. Part of growing up is your body training itself to detect the harmful germs and build up defenses against them. And actually, that's what a vaccine does.
Yeah. Is that metaphorically, is there a vaccine for, I don't know, what many would call kind of an illness, I think, a pandemic of division, and on so many different levels?
There is. In fact, there are numbers of vaccines. I was married for 40 years, and my first wife died of liver cancer. And the last movie we went to before she went into the hospital was Bodyguard, and where
Oh, yeah.
Whitney Houston sang "I Will Always Love You." And so when she died, I used to just ride around the expressway and listen to that song until one day I turned on a country music station and I heard the original version by Dolly Parton and Vince Gill. And there was so much more emotion and spiritual power in the country version than the modern version, that I started listening to country music. And country music became a bridge to me, um, for all of the anxiety. And I mean, I began to understand why white people who have different challenges than I do, um, sing different songs. Now, the integration of the music, and the last time I saw the Emmys, they had uniquely integrated country western music with the blues and jazz. And that's one of the ways we overcome the isolation and insecurity of being human. Now, the other way has been sport. That they won't just, I mean, everybody in Atlanta is going to be out on the streets this afternoon celebrating the Braves. See, and or when we won the Olympics, it brought the town together because we realized we wouldn't have gotten the Olympics if we hadn't celebrated every ethnic group in the city. I mean, having a big Hispanic community meant that when the Hispanic representatives from the uh, Olympic Committee came to Atlanta, we had a big community greeting them in Spanish and took them to their homes and showed them how we were living. We did the same thing with, well, I didn't know we had a Polish community in Atlanta. See, I just figured everything was black and white. But we had a Polish community that was not only fluent and still spoke the language, but they reached out. In fact, they went out on their own to bring the Polish delegate here, and convince him that he should vote for Atlanta. And they told them, we'd be glad to have you bring the families of the athletes to live in our homes for free, so they can see their sons and daughters in the Olympics. And that was not only the key to our Olympic success. I realized that's the reason why we've been tracking so much international business. See, that people can come here and feel comfortable because they're people just like us. And we formed a soccer team, and at the first soccer match there were 68,000 fans, because most of the people come from places where they don't play football. They play a little baseball, but everybody in the world plays soccer. So sports, you can't find a football team that's all one way or the other. Even the historically black colleges are attracting white athletes because they figure it'll better prepare them for the pros. And it's one of the things that makes our society successful. And we don't think about it enough. And that's why I appreciate what you're doing with your Leaders Lyceum.
Yes.
And is that we need to do more of this. And we need to do it in almost every aspect of our lives. That we've been quite broad, quite general here today, and that was necessary to, well, I didn't, I don't know how you're thinking of it, but it's almost like we've been trying to build a curriculum.
Yeah.
And
do you know, I'm finally getting there, but the thread that I hear emerging in almost every story you've told is that there's a coming together, and that there's intentionality and regularity in coming together and building
yeah,
those relationships, and in not just being known, but knowing the other differently, perhaps. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
no,
that
but you are. You're saying what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that life develops certain rituals that are necessary for the survival of civilization. See,
oh,
and gospel music, country music, jazz, sports, politics. I mean, we right now our politics is divided because we had gotten to a consensus where everybody could be either Democrat, Republican, or we had a few independents who could go back, who were independent because they wanted to go both sides. And now we had an election that left us divided.
yeah. Hey, you've been so generous with your time, and I know you surely you've got things on you, and lunch at least probably. But as you scan the horizon of maybe even our globe, but certainly our country right now, and you consider leadership, where's your greatest hope? I know it's in God. You've spoken of that before, but is there a movement? Are there people? Is there something you've seen that gives you hope right now for your children's generation and their children's generation?
Well, I mean, when you said, is there something that gives you hope? My grandmother used to sing, my hope is built on nothing less than
Yeah,
Jesus' love and righteousness. You know,
I know.
I dare not trust the sweetest frame or something, but only lean on Jesus' name. And I do. I go back to the Bible, and I go back to Elisha. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he will strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. They that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get weary. They will walk and not faint. See, and there are enough. I mean, the Bible is a book of struggle, and that verse was probably written just about the time that the temple was destroyed in Israel. But it has probably been one of the verses that has held together a people for centuries. In the New Testament, it's the stories of Jesus. But my grandmother would say the 23rd Psalm every day. Especially the part, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And I think that's what literature is for. Literature of all kinds. They made us learn Rudyard Kipling's If when I joined my college fraternity. You can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, and yet make allowances for their doubting too. See, and it's I mean that's what literature is about. And in my times of struggle, I usually find some song, some poem, some book, biography of somebody who struggled with similar issues. And you can't write a book unless you triumph. And my book, the book I wrote about the civil rights movement, is called An Easy Burden. And yeah, And the thing is that I wanted people to realize that being Black has never been a burden to me. I mean, I've always seen it as a blessing. And well, Jesus said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Mm-hmm. See, and my grandmama used to say that. And so I've, I've I've found that in the darkest hours of my life, like the death of Martin Luther King, the death of my wife, that somehow, one, those deaths are never an end. I would say that my first wife is still a voice in my heart and my life, because we were together for 40 years. Now, since she died, I've been married for 25 more years to another woman. And fortunately, they knew each other. But with Martin Luther King, I was talking to some of his family. And it's hard for them to see this, but I said, you know, your father is probably much more powerful and alive today than he was in 1968 when he was assassinated. That hardly a day goes by when you don't hear somebody quote him about something.
That's right. Ambassador Young, the generosity of your time, just sharing your thoughts. There are many of us in the adult development, psychological people who study this for a living that think that you are one of the most important living figures today, and for you to make your time available to me and our audience, I just can't tell you. It's been one of the joys of COVID for me.
But you're giving me a chance to meet your entire audience. Otherwise, I'm just talking to myself back here in this little office. So thank you very much for giving me the invitation.
My pleasure, okay. and my honor. Thank you so much.
Keith, what a great conversation you had with Ambassador Young. I have a number of thoughts I want to share, but since this was your gift of time that he gave you, what stood out to you the most? What are you still thinking about?
I mean, I just thought it was so, I don't know, maybe almost unexpected and interesting that he kind of, his opening thoughts about this 90th birthday that he's approaching, it was like reconciliation is what I want for my birthday, you know, but also thinking about what that meant for him and deciding he himself was going to reach out and reconcile. Kind of, I just love that. I love that thought.
Yeah, and I think about that it wasn't just reconciliation for the world. It was like he wants his friends to reconcile with the people that they are in conflict with, like a gift for them almost was what he wanted for his birthday. And I love the way that he explained that reconciliation is coming together in spite of our differences, in spite of our conflict, in spite of where you're wrong or I'm wrong. Let's come together. And he even references it in terms of the race, the mayoral race that just happened. And my candidate lost. All right, let's come together. And how our world is struggling so much to do that. And I think to build on that, the thing that was such a challenge, I think, in the way he explained it, is that reconciliation and growth requires us to look at ourselves first. We need to look at ourselves to resolve the tensions, especially in these times where there are all these external stressors and we want to get mad at the world and lash out at the world. In numerous occasions during his conversation with you, he said, we got to look at ourselves. It starts with yourself. You have to learn to resolve your internal conflict in an external reality. And just the ownership that he acknowledges over his own life and his own health and his own well-being, that's the only way to do it. The only way we can come together is if I look at myself first. And I think we all need to do more of that.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think, that's the thing that has always jumped out at me in all of these interactions. I mean, he's just a storyteller at heart. So he makes a lot of his points through stories. But in some of those more direct pieces of advice, or the way he understands something that you just went over, we've talked about moving in the direction of level 5. First of all, that you have to be level 4. You have to be self-authored. You have to have kind of your inside out paradigm, but you're defined by that paradigm. But one of the things that you hear in the way, not only the way he tells his stories, but the way that he made the points that I don't want to reiterate that you just made, is that there's almost like he is able to detach from himself and sort of take an object. That's the assumption that's behind that. It's a very level 5 assumption, that this idea of looking inward and seeing not only what you bring to the table and being honest and yet humble about the cool things that you bring, but looking at the things where you may have been at fault or where you're carrying guilt, and this recognition that when I'm feeling some level of guilt about something, I'm usually taking that out on someone that I love, right? All this first person kind of recognition. So it's so hard to put your finger on with him. And yet it's in almost every single story that he tells and every single point that he makes. There's just a level of confidence, humility, and yet this kind of rising above the fray. There's like a calmness almost that it just pervades all of this. And, to one of the points that you just made, one of my favorite pieces of writing ever is Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail. And it is a reconciliation piece in a lot of ways. And yet King is putting himself in the shoes of the white clergy and of the people who are more insisting that we need to push forward now, right? And this is back in the middle of the 60s. But Andrew Young's entire career as a congressperson, as a civil rights icon and leader, as the mayor of Atlanta, is bringing together disparate points of view and creating reconciliation and connection in order to achieve a bigger goal. It was why the city of Atlanta, largely amongst a handful of other key people, why the city of Atlanta got the '96 Olympic Games. Anyway, I could keep going on, but I'm just worried it would be super rambly. So if you go ahead.
Well, just while you were talking, and one other thing I realized I had written down, as a recovering perfectionist and self-critic, right? When I hear this idea of we have to look at ourselves and take ownership of ourselves, I can sometimes go into this very critical view of myself and all the things that I've done wrong and all my faults. It's my Enneagram 1 coming out, but I love that he said that part of this process is we have to learn to accept our own shortcomings with a no fault analysis of ourselves, have grace for ourselves, accept forgiveness for ourselves and others. And again, just a really beautiful challenge. As you mentioned at the beginning, we had to cut out parts of this conversation in order to get it in our podcast. And not only did we have to edit it down, Andrew actually gave you 2 blocks of time. And so we have 2 distinct conversations that you had with him. Both of those videos are going to be available in their entirety. And there was just a theme that came out of the first part of your conversation with him that we edited that I was sad to lose. But again, I want our people to go check out the other video. But to just make the point here, he tells a lot of stories in the first part about kind of how he ended up where he did, including how he met his wife, how he ended up as the only Black man at a all-white church conference, and all these other fun stories. And throughout those stories, it was this theme of, if not me, then who? Right? Yeah. If I leave this conference, I'm the only Black man that can be here right now. So if it's not me who gets to engage with these people in a new way, if not me, then who? If I don't take this role as a pastor, nobody else will go there. And just this day by day faithfulness of, what is it that I can do today that only I can do, that if I don't do it, it won't be done. And I just think that's such a powerful way to view life and purpose and passion. And just, I thought that was a really cool part, that even if people don't watch that part of the conversation, I wanted to share that message from him because I thought it was really, really special.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. And hopefully that's enough of a hook to get people to go, hey, folks, you know what you ought to do? It's the new year. And a lot of you guys have, if you haven't said it out loud, you've decided that you want to be healthier in 2022, just the way you said in 2021 and the way we'll say in 2023. But, you know, why don't you go for a couple of walks with me and Andrew Young?
I love it.
You can, yeah, I mean, just take, because it is, the pace of the conversation is slower, but it's beautiful and it's thoughtful and it's thought provoking, you know, and yet it would be hard to just sit down at your desk and watch 2.5 hours of video, right? But to just we're going to make this available right on the YouTube channel. And do they get there through the Growing Grownups podcast? I mean, Growing Grownups website to get there? Or do they have to go to YouTube to get there?
Both. You can go to growinggrownups.com/young, and it will have the edited video and then links to the 2 extended videos. Okay. And then They could also go to the Leaders Lyceum YouTube channel and find all the videos there.
Yeah, perfect. So I would just so encourage people to do that. And I hope you enjoyed what we edited down to today. But, you know, if you're a fan of his the way I am, or if you just want to be a fly in the wall for a conversation with a really cool person, I'd just so recommend it. So that's all from me, Sarah, unless you've got something else.
No, I think that's great. I think we've given them a lot to think about. And I just hope that our listeners sit and think about what it means to keep growing and rise above the differences and all the things that Andrew talked about. So with that, I think that's a wrap, and we will see everybody in 2 weeks for the next episode of the Growing as Grownups podcast. If you love this show, we'd love for you to tell your friends, get the word out.
Take care, y'all.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Growing as Grownups. Take a second and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes, and tell your friends. You'll find all of the goods related to this episode, including the transcript, videos, links, and other ways we can help you keep growing as a grownup on our website, growinggrownups.com. Growth isn't easy, but it's completely within your reach. Until next time, journey well, friends.